the channel. Robert Kesakos is your usual suspect. Welcome back to yet another live broadcast on your favorite football updates channel. That's at Footballtribe UG. We do come to you live every single day, every single morning, live straight live from Kampala, Uganda. So it's a pleasure to always be back with you guys. And I hope even this morning you will join us as we continue to discuss more sports updates from the FIFA Club World Cup, from the world of transfers, from your favorite Premier League clubs, and slightly beyond. So allow me have my audios tested before we get into the thick of this morning's conversation that will revolve around Manchester United, among other things. So I think audios are in the clear now. Just waiting on you guys to join the broadcast this morning, so that we get the conversation going. But as we wait for you guys, allow me send my shout outs to people like Cedric, straight out of France, who joined us last night. Among every single one of you, the usual suspects, the regular people, semi-regular, and the irregular people who come once in a while and watch, and you give us all the encouragement to keep going in as far as bringing you the best on this channel is concerned. So, like I said, our updates will come straight from the FIFA Club World Cup. That's where we will get started. We will talk a bit about Chelsea in the wake of their finds. We got to discuss that a bit last night, and we will revisit it a little more. Otherwise, I wish to say thank you to all of you that have watched our content under the video section. Thank you so much for sparing the time to look under that section. For those of you that check out our short section, I cannot take your love and support for granted as well. I do appreciate you a great deal. A bit of a slowdown in activity under our short section in terms of your watch activity, but nonetheless, we still do appreciate you. I implore you to always go under the short section and check out for the quickest of updates in regards to things of that nature. Anyways, okay, need to have my messages turned on, everything, so that I do not miss out any single thing from you guys and all that. So, but like I said, we will start the conversation from the Club World Cup, where Chelsea beat up against Palmeiras in the morning, leading to today. That was at 4 a.m. East African time, beating Palmeiras by 2-1. Very interesting game there. William Esteval, as we had hoped or perhaps expected, came back to bite his bosses, who bought him last summer and decided that he would stay with Palmeiras for one more season before he joins the Blues. So he did score the equalizer in that game as Palmeiras restored a parity against Chelsea, who had taken the lead in the 16th minute through Cole Palmer. So Esteval's goal came in the 53rd minute. Both goals were quite interesting. The way Cole Palmer sort of takes on those defenders before, basically passing that ball into the bottom corner was quite swift and clean. And then on the other side, the way Esteval controls that pass, takes it in his stride, in what you thought was a was a bit of a narrow angle, and yet he's able to take off that shot. It hits the crossbar before going into the back of the net. And then Agustin Gay, unfortunately, in the 8:30 minutes, considered an own goal as to give Chelsea the lead, which turned out to be the winning goal of the game. That ball attempted by Malo Gusto. Yes, of course, the keeper was caught a bit off guard with the deflection that he took. But again, usually goalkeeper with quick reflexes, I think would have done better to save that moment, that opportunity. The statistics, of course, show Chelsea's dominancy in that game, up to 63% possession. The way they were able to try and control that, in different phases of the game, to control that midfield, how they progressed the ball, to have a total of 19 shots, 6 on target, of course. Pyramids were only reduced to 2 shots on target out of their total 7. When you look at the passes completed, Chelsea with just a pass less than 500, while Pyramids only had 291, and things of that nature. So really, when you look around, Chelsea were by far the dominant side. If statistics are anything to go by, I think Chelsea should really relish in the fact that they are getting William Estaval, very brilliant player. But like again, I've spoken before, given Chelsea's, the sort of squad depth in their front lines, they have about 13 attacking players. It remains to be seen how they will assemble, who gets priority. Of course, apparently, from what we're hearing, is Noni Madueke is open to a move to Arsenal. In the wake of those numbers, we know he didn't start yesterday's game. I think he had to come off the bench because they started with Robert Sanchez in goal, of course, Marco Cucurella, Levi Colwill, Trevor Chalobah, alongside Malo Gusto. Enzo Fernandez was alongside Andre Santos in that midfield. Christopher Nkunku in for alongside Cole Palmer and Pedro Neto, with Liam Delap leading the lines. Now, this was quite the significant change in midfield to start Enzo Fernandez and Andre Santos ahead of Moises Caicedo, the likes of Romeo Lavia, who had been regulars in that starting midfield. Then João Pedro got his moments when he came on in the second half. Dario Esugo equally, Noni Madueke got his chance. Kenan Brisbury Hall were some of the changes that came in. So brilliant. So when you look at Chelsea's list for attacking players, you look at Noni Madueke, you look at João Pedro, Kenan Brisbury Hall, and you look at of course, Kenan Brisbury Hall is an attacking midfielder, but we know he loves to play as a bit of a tape. So you look at all those names. Jamie Gittens is coming in. Nicholas Jackson, and a new substitute. They are open to letting him go. Liam Delap, Tariq George, McGuey. These are players that we've seldom mentioned. McGuey was one of those regulars in the UEFA Conference League last season. So, Pedro Neto didn't even make the bench in the work of the passing of, Diego Jota, again, on the other side. For those of you that do remember, in the earlier game, that was between Al Hilal against Fluminense, which they lost by 2-1. Emotional scenes for, that's his best friend. For Ruben Neves, was best friends with Diego Jota, and João Cancelo, his fellow countryman, the fellow Portuguese national team player. They were all, the must have played really with heavy hearts when Diego Jota's portrait was displayed on the screen. It sort of broke them down. It was an emotional night as they honored a minute of silence in the work of Diego Jota is passing alongside his brother Andre Silva in that car accident in Spain. Yesterday's games, of course, that first game had a lot of emotions. That was as Fluminense beat up against Al Hilal, and then Tubukwe have placed in the semi-finals. While that other game for Chelsea equally ending, in victory for Chelsea. But it's the reason as why we didn't get to see. Pedro Neto was in the game. Apologies for mix-up. But again, I remember in the pre-match press conference, Enzo Maresca speaking about it and said they had to assess his emotional state of mind. But he was able to play, just like Ruben Neves and João Cancelo and all the other Portuguese national team players that have been engaged in any action whatsoever since then. But it can be any easy. It can be any easy really on any of them. But Chelsea do book their place in the semi-finals, and they will play against Fluminense. So let's wait. Again, Chelsea will be playing against one of their former players, in Thiago Silva. So that game will be coming next week on Tuesday at 10 p.m. East African time. Now, Chelsea, with that win, they get to win themselves another 21 million euros. Yesterday, we know that UEFA fined them 31 million euros for being in breach of the financial fair play rules. So, I mean, how is it supposed to be a fair fight when teams like Chelsea, not that they are the ones to blame in any way, but here they are playing at the FIFA Club World Cup, earning these extra financial resources for being part and parcel of that tournament, and they get to sort of have a bit of the final laugh at UEFA to say, look, you just fined us 31 million by just playing this game. We get 21 million, so we can pay you up front. I mean, just like that. So, anyways, Chelsea were fined alone. They were fined alongside Aston Villa, who were fined at 11 million euros for being in breach of the financial fair play rules. Barcelona, I think, fined 15 million euros. Besiktas fined 900,000 pounds, while Panathinaikos were fined 400,000 pounds, among a host of other clubs. Of course, UEFA issued a very, very lengthy statement explaining everything, but those were the highlights of some of those submissions in the wake of Chelsea's fines, as among all the other teams that have been fined for being in breach of the UEFA financial fair play rules. So, again, when you look at the amount of money that Chelsea are bound to make out of this tournament, because if they do win it, they're going to make money no less than 90 million pounds, which means with that you get to pay off UEFA for their fines. You get to pay off whatever you agreed to pay in the first installment for João Pedro and the Jamie Gittins, and you still have balances to pay players bonuses, for reaching thus far in the tournament, and do perhaps even more transfer business. So let's wait and see. Let's wait and see, really, in regards to how those things will transpire. But Chelsea, should they not stick to an agreement that they do have with UEFA, then they could be fined an extra 60 million euros if they do not get their house in order. And the reason as why some of you were asking me yesterday in a certain forum, why are Chelsea being fined by UEFA and yet the Premier League is not doing anything against them, when we know that the Premier League has the profit and sustainability rules. Now, you ought to remember that Chelsea sold their women's side to a subsidiary, Blueco, I think. You know how Chelsea are under ownership by the American owners. Now, what they did is sell the women's side to one of their subsidiaries for 200 million pounds, which was recorded as revenue coming into the club. So they get to look like they're not making their money making club. They're not, they're not making losses. And then they also sold the two hotels at Stamford Bridge. They also sold them to one of their subsidiaries, which brought in about 76 million pounds. So that's more revenue coming into the club. And at the tail end of last month, Aston Villa basically did the same thing, selling their women's team to that V Sports, a company, to bring in more revenue. Now the Premier League allows that, so for them they see that as income coming into the club, while UEFA did disqualify or does not consider as such deals. So that's why UEFA is fining them alongside Aston Villa, while the Premier League is saying we'll consider that as a revenue coming in. Maybe the Premier League may move in the future to regulate such deals in regards to staying in the confines of the law. But in the long run, I mean, I get to wonder about the future of the profit and sustainability rules, especially in the Premier League, because on one hand, you want the investment to come into football to be the biggest brand of club football there is in the world. That's for the Premier League. But then on the other hand, you're trying to literally tie these clubs away from future investment, especially from their owners. So take an example of Newcastle, acquired by new owners who think Newcastle ought to be, in the top leagues, alongside the likes of, Liverpool, Manchester City, Arsenal, United, Chelsea, regardless of how you rank them. And yet you're telling their new owners that, look here, guys, yes, you've just bought the club, but you can only survive on what you make. in terms of revenues. You cannot just wake up and inject in a whole lot of cash. Now, of course, clubs are allowed to acquire loans and things of that nature, but again, within the specific regulations, there are limits beyond which they cannot go. For example, we know for a fact now these rules, some of these rules have been changed since Arsenal are getting loans from their directors. That's the Kroenkes from their key. I think it's called KS Sports, the company that or runs all their sporting investments, including in American football. I think Denver Nuggets, that's in the in the NBA, things of that nature. So they were loaning money to Arsenal, and they also helped Arsenal pay off a debt that was pending, I think, to complete the debt that was Arsenal still paying on their stadium. That's the Emirates Stadium, to fully own the assets. So now the Premier League went and revisited some of those regulations and said, I think owners cannot just keep loaning monies to their own clubs. Manchester City did also navigate the rules their own way, especially when Sheikh Mansour they did acquire the club. That's why they have charges dating far back between 2009 and 2018, because that's when the Premier League believes most of Manchester City's financial irregularities happened and things of that nature, really. So, but I mean, big clubs will keep getting away with it in some form of respect, because see, the thing about laws, it's about interpretation and being smart about it when it comes to the accounting. Apparently, Manchester City, now, one of the accusations to Manchester City was because they were apparently over-exaggerating advertising revenue coming in from some of their advertisers. For example, Etihad. Now we know Etihad. We know the people who own Etihad have they had in Manchester City as well. So it's more like for example, you owning a football club, and then you get your other business, let's say that dealing in beverages, to pay your club advertising revenue for you to advertise with them. And then you sort of say, okay, we paid them, let's say, $1 million in for advertising, and yet the actual fee maybe was 800,000 euros, or dollars, or pounds, that kind of thing. So the Premier League believed that there was an exaggeration of figures in that sense. Quickly, let's move away from that anyways, and then go to Arsenal. Arsenal now did come out to issue yesterday a statement regarding those charges that have been brought before, or that have been brought on Thomas Partey. We all know that yesterday, the former Arsenal player in Thomas Partey, 32 years of age, that's the Ghanaian international, who ended his relationship with the club effectively on June 30th, has been charged with 5 counts of rape and 1 count of sexual assault. Now, the case does involve 3 women, 2 with 2 charges of rape, another woman with 3 counts of rape, while the other woman is the one bringing the charge of a sexual assault. Now, he is expected to appear in court. That will be on the Tuesday, 5th August, at the Westminster Magistrates Court, to answer to those charges, which, according to his lawyer, he does welcome the opportunity to clear his name. It's been an ongoing investigation for the last 3 years. Those investigations having started as far back as February 2022. Now, apparently the offenses, these alleged offenses, were committed between 2021 and 2022. So, and he's been forthcoming with all the investigations according to reports. And it is in the wake of those charges that the club have come out to issue a statement, which is quite very brief. And I thought, indeed, they didn't need to say more. The club said the players' contract ended on June 30th due to ongoing legal proceedings. The club is unable to comment on the case. So it was put simply that way. Then Now, a lot of people have come out to, criticize Arsenal, question Mikel Arteta's values and morality and culture and history of the club and things of that nature, which I find to be as biased as they come in tests. And because it because certain clubs had sort of set precedent, they had hoped or wanted Arsenal to act the same way, which is contrary to what I think I do think. And first of all, I will start at the point of innocent until proven guilty. That's for starters. A lot of people are condemning Thomas Partey as if he's been already found guilty, which is not the case. Two, I'm sure, just pretty much like Thomas Partey, the club was privy that the player was under investigation. But merely to them and to the player, all these were mere accusations. There were no charges brought or preferred to him. So until yesterday, what the club knew was being investigated, but there were no charges. And we can cite for you as many cases as there is. Now, in the past, we've had players being condemned by their clubs to sort of ruin their careers. Gaffney Sigerton, you remember him, was a record buy for Everton. He was, accused of sexual assault on a minor, which was, which would have made him a pedophile. But at the end of the day, he missed 3 years of football, which ruined his career. I never played for Everton again because Everton chose to suspend him during the course of the investigations. But guess what? At the end of the day, no charges were brought before him. Of course, he was arrested and then released on bail. But when they investigated the matter, the authorities concluded that there wasn't sufficient evidence to bring charges before him. And he walked, not he walked that he was guilty, but he walked because he was innocent. Then we remember the case of Benjamin Mendy. 6 women came up to accuse him of rape. He was eventually cleared, Now, the slight difference here in the case of Benjamin Mendy is Manchester City suspended him after he had been arrested and charged, And guess what? After winning his cases, he came back to sue Man City for £11 million in unpaid wages because the club had chosen to, put him off their wage bill while he was facing those charges and while he was suspended, which meant that he wasn't being paid. So once it was ruled that he was innocent, he came to claim. Now, 2 years robbed of 2 years of his football career, which he's never going to get back. Now, the unfortunate bit in all this is that we have victims on the other side, those that are claiming that they were raped or they were assaulted in any form or shape. And then on this side, we have people that are innocent until proven that they are guilty, who are saying, look, these are false accusations. And it's not far-fetched or not even a public secret that previously, or there is precedent that women are falsely accused of people. The falsely accused celebrities, players, or people in everyday life, and those people were eventually cleared. We have the case of Cristiano Ronaldo, what involving a lady from Las Vegas in 2009. We all know because he wanted to keep his name clean, they chose to pay that woman $375,000 US dollars for her to keep her mouth shut. And she tried then to 10 years later or a decade later to bring a lawsuit to claim $25 million from Cristiano Ronaldo. The judge kicked that case out kicked that case out. We know something happened with Neymar. Now, just imagine, Neymar had been suspended by his club when he was being falsely accused of rape. Again, he also got to clear his name. We've had these things, one too many times happen to players, and eventually they get their names cleared in the work of not being found guilty, but on the other side, you have their reputations, dragged in the mud. You have their careers broken. You have, everything going for them, their brand deals, their income sources up, ruined, because we know players have these kinds of commercial deals where they sign with, Nike, Adidas, Puma, and things of that nature. those are commercial deals that they get to sign. And once you have such accusations, whether guilty or not, usually the rug is pulled on you. You know, these deals are pulled because your name is being linked with bad PR and things of that nature. So we know that things of that nature have happened, you know, and yet these people have been proven innocent. The question of Mason Greenwood, literally his career was going to go down the drain because there were accusations levied against him that he on charges of what? Assault and attempted rape, you know. And guess what? The Crown Prosecution Services on 2nd February 2023 announced that those charges had been discontinued because due to lack of because the key witnesses in the matter had pulled out. You know, they had pulled out. So you can imagine, you know, being treated in that kind of manner when you're innocent. Now, Manchester United themselves, their hand was literally forced. First of all, they sort of suspended the player. He was training away from the main squad and eventually away from the squad. Then by the time all this came to light, they also conducted their own internal investigations and found that the player was in the clear. Now, they had thought their plan was to reintegrate him into the main team and continue to come back, bring him back in the fold. But then there was all these sorts of protests by women supporting Manchester United around Old Trafford, etc., etc. And eventually, that's how he ended up going out on loan to Getafe. And after one season-long loan at Getafe, where he did tremendously well, I remember, you know, Getafe getting their fair share of bad PR because of signing Mason Greenwood. But again, Getafe defended themselves, saying that to the best of our knowledge, the player has no case to answer. He's been, you know, these charges were sort of dropped because the authorities found nothing, you know, worth the salt of prosecuting him. Because let's assume there was some bit of evidence other than the key witnesses, then possibly the prosecution could have gone ahead to make their case, but they did not proceed with that. So you have that bit of situation. So Getafe defended themselves, and I think they did really, really well on that front. And he played for them an entire season, did well, returned to Manchester United, and got you know, a move to Olympique Marseille, where he's really, really flourishing. Now, when you're Manchester United, you look at that bit of talent, and had it not been for PR, you could have a game of a player in Mason Greenwood. But because of these wild accusations that came against him, soiled the player's reputation, and have the public court, because usually the challenge is with the public court. The public court condemns you before you even found guilty. Now, my point is, you're innocent until proven guilty. If you are proven guilty, then face the wrath of the law. That should be the principle. But we have this kind of public court where we are quick to condemn people for simply because they've been accused. Now, just imagine, you wake up one morning and your neighbor is saying, he attempted to rape me or she attempted to rape me. It's an accusation, you know. It gets investigated and then you're proven innocent. But during the course of the entire investigations, let's assume you're fired from work, or you know, you're being condemned by the entire public. Your name is ruined, and yet at the end of the day, when you prove innocent, this person is not going to repair your image, and you know, and that kind of thing. So it is a bit of a delicate balance for parties involved in the case. For example, when it comes to, for example, in Arsenal's form, because on the other side you have victims that are accusing Thomas Partey of these you know, crimes, and then on the side you have Thomas Partey with his football career who is saying, I'm innocent. I mean, so would you sympathize with the victim at the expense of your own player just because they are accusations? So it's a bit of a delicate balance, and sometimes clubs have come to stand with their players to say, we will retain them on their contracts, they will continue to play football, because these are accusations. Until they become charges, that's when they choose to act. Now, in the work of Everton, they acted before charge because the player had been arrested, you know. But guess what? He was proven innocent at the end of the day because there wasn't sufficient evidence to even prosecute the case. So that's the unfortunate bit of life. I keep saying, if you want to understand the graphicness of what it means for you to publicly condemn such people, people like Thomas Partey, people like Gabriel Sigurdsson, people like Neymar, people like Cristiano Ronaldo, people like I think it was Marcus, it was Thuram, one of those that was, did face these kinds of charges on his name. All you need to do is go back in history and look at some of those names for Calum Odoi. So look at those examples. People that were falsely accused and then eventually were cleared. Just put yourself in their shoes and imagine if it had been you. Would you rather you be suspended from work without pay? Would you rather you be fired from work just because somebody is falsely accusing you? Now, should the case be that you're guilty, then you face the law. That's how it works. That's how it should work on all grounds. It shouldn't matter whether you're a public figure or not, whether you're a celebrity or a layman. What should matter is that at the point of accusation, you're innocent until proven guilty. And if you're guilty, you face the wrath of the law. We have the case of Dani Alves. We know what happened in Spain. He had similar accusations, and apparently Lionel Messi was helping pay his, legal bills. So for me, that's how I look at it, really. But I do not think Arsenal were at any level or at any ground at fault unless you are biased in your view. I do understand the argument that you have a victim on the other side, but just because you have a victim on the other side doesn't mean you condemn this person before you even have grounds for condemning them. Because let's take an example. Let's say a club players went out on a party. Let's say, I don't want to use any particular club names here. Let's assume your club won a title, and then all your players, the entire squad, went out to party, to celebrate, and then after an entire night of partying and celebrating, etc., the following morning, all players had accusations from different women accusing them of sexual assault or rape. Those are mere accusations which are going to be investigated by police. Would you suggest to us that then the club should suspend all their entire squad just because they are facing those accusations? And then what happens to the club? Because it is easy for us to make the argument if it is one player involved. Now assume maybe half of your entire squad is involved. What do? Do you suggest that a club should suspend the entire squad or half of it just because there are allegations leveled against them? And then let's say investigations take 3-4 years. What happens during the course of 3-4 years? Because the football on the pitch has to continue, by the way. It has to continue. So what happens in that period? Do you suggest that then a club loses maybe those 2-3-4 years and then eventually the players are found innocent? Do we have to wait for that? So because the reason as to why people making those arguments that the player should have been condemned is because if eventually he's found guilty, then they get to say it's an I told you kind of, and I told you so, that you should have acted quick because all along he was guilty. Okay, but we do not know that to be a fact until it is discovered in that manner, until that case has been judged to be that he is guilty. So innocent until proven guilty. So when you look at it with those kinds of lenses, then you'll get to understand why it is not as simple. Why I do say that it's a bit of a delicate balance that you ought to look at. But just imagine if, let's say, an entire team, after a night of partying and enjoying, celebrating, they had all such accusations leveled against them. Would you rather your club suspends all the players? Would you rather they dismiss all the players, without pay until until the authorities reach a final conclusion on those matters? I certainly do not think so, that you would look at it that way. Of course, some of you would be saying now that, now the situation will be different if it involves, very many players. I mean, you just can't run away with an accusation and condemn somebody based on that accusation. That's my point. Anyways, let's move away from, Thomas Partey's issues and Arsenal and the entire worldview on that. So maybe maybe I think I should do another live on a different channel to discuss that a bit further. But it's a bit of a feisty one. Anyways, moving away, let's speak Manchester United, because apparently 5 players from Manchester United, that's in Alejandro Garnacho, Jodan Sancho, Marcus Rashford, Tyler Malacia, and Antony have all requested to leave the club. And it is being reported that they will be given more days off before returning to possibly Paddington for pre-season, as they try to find where their future lies. Now, the writing has always been on the wall for majority of these players, but Alejandro Garnacho and Tyler Malacia, because for Tyler Malacia, we all know he's not had any trouble with the club. All that is happened to him is a series of injuries that have made him unworthy to play or unplayable at Manchester United. So for the second part of last season, he went out on loan at PSV Eindhoven, where he helped them win the Dutch Eredivisie title. So then for the case of Marcus Rashford, we know there have been questions of attitude and things of that nature, but largely he was off form, and there's no reported fight, maybe between himself and the manager or in a Kakuno players. Whatever the situation was, he went out on loan to Aston Villa, where he did really, really well to show that he is still a very good player in a 27-year-old in there. So then the question of Antony, I mean, he didn't do anything wrong. Things just didn't work out for him at Manchester United. He was unhappy, he was miserable, and he said just as much in one of those interviews that he did. So he went out on loan to Royal Betis, and he had a good time, scoring 9 goals and providing 5 assists in a space of about 4 months. So he says he needs to go back to Real Betis because he was happy there, he was playing good football, and he doesn't see a future for him at Manchester United. That's how he views it. For Alejandro Garnacho, it's about his discipline. Now, discipline in what sense? Not that he's abused anyone, really. Discipline in the sense of how he's conducted himself publicly and on social media. Of course, largely, he's remembered for those comments that he did make in the aftermath of a 1-0 defeat against to Tottenham in the finals of the Europa League, as Manchester United lost. And for people that dissected his comments, were saying he was trying to make it all about him when an entire team had lost. And all he said, as far as I can remember, is that they had a bad season, which was right. 2, he said he had been playing well, contributing. Now, the well is debatable, and the contribution is debatable, because I think he had 1 goal and 4 assists in the competition. So he said he had been playing until the final, and then he doesn't get started for the final. But again, if we are being objective enough, guess who started ahead of him? It was Mason Mount. The Mason Mount who had not kicked a ball in how many months, until he returned and scored a brace against Athletic Bilbao, and they scored a goal against Brentford. Really. So I do not think he was wrong in an individual assessment of himself, to say, I think I would have done better, than Mason Mount. And when you look, what did Mason Mount do in that game? Nothing. He was reduced to a pedestrian. Of course, majority of Manchester United players had been reduced to pedestrians in that game, but he has an argument. Now, for a player who is only 20 years of age, sometimes these disciplinary issues are bound to be there. But let's face it, Diego Costa at Chelsea, he wasn't the most popular figure. We knew he was a riffraff, but he delivered on the pitch. He was mature to deliver. You remember when he shouted at Antonio Conte? I do not remember what game, and he was calling him on to bring on Cesc Fabregas. That was Diego Costa shouting at his manager, Antonio Conte, who we all know how rough he can be with his players, but shouting at him, bring on Cesc, Then we all know how Sir Alex Ferguson stood with Eric Cantona. We knew about his disciplinary issues, but he was a good player on the pitch. So that's why, for me, I think that even with Garnacho, yes, he has disciplinary things to work on in terms of the way he carries himself as a professional player, but it's not like he is broken beyond repair. That's not how I look at it, really. So, but anyway, at the end of the day, it's Ruben Amorim's decision and the club's decision. I get the feeling that maybe based on his personal assessment, he had gotten word about an overall assessment on the squad, the kinds of players maybe that were bound to open their mouth in here and there in the dressing room, and perhaps some of them, their future was condemned long before he even walked into that dressing room at Carrington. But apparently, Ruben Amorim told Alejandro Garnacho that his future at Man United was done in that final meeting that they had before the game against Aston Villa for the final day of the Premier League, and then which they won by 2-0, and eventually went away for the Asian tour and things of that nature. So with Marcus Rashford, all he wants is to go to Barcelona, but we know Barcelona's financial challenges because Manchester United want £40 million, and then their challenges with registering players because of La Liga's wage caps and things of that nature. We know they've faced similar challenges in the past, and that's why they've been unable to sign Nico Williams, who signed a new contract at Athletic Bilbao to break the hearts of many suitors with a new release clause believed to be in the region of 95 to 100 million euros. It's a 10-year contract running up to until June 2035. So you can imagine that kind of situation. But then for Antony, I believe, they should just let him go. Bayer Leverkusen are interested because they are now under the charges of Erik ten Hag, but let's wait and see. I think the challenge will be likely on the transfer fees. For Jodan Sancho, again, we all know it was a mishandled disciplinary issue between him and the then manager in Erik ten Hag, which I thought Erik ten Hag publicly could have handled that much better. And then Jodan Sancho, his reaction, maybe he would have taken a chill pill at the moment and chose to confront the manager behind closed doors, but he went public, and while that statement has since been deleted, we cannot unread it. So that's the situation. So the writing was on the wall for many of these players. We know Juventus are pushing really, really hard to sign Jodan Sancho, but there are a couple of other Premier League clubs that have been interested in his services, as well as clubs from the Saudi Pro League. For Marcus Rashford, Aston Villa won't be taking him on, not because they do not want to, but because of the finances involved. We all know they are fighting to be on the right side of PSR rules. That's why they are putting some players on the market for sale. Players like Oli Watkins, players like Emi Martinez, that's the 32-year-old Argentine goalkeeper. Players like Morgan Rogers could be on the exit. Maybe Lucas Digne, just to try and raise some, monies. And then, so that's with that. Then I've told you there's no qualms with Tyler Malacia. So basically, that's the situation revolving around Manchester United and their want away players. Then what else? Okay. We need but basically that's it. That's the whole gist of it. Brentford are refusing to back down in the evaluation of Brian Mbeumo. They want at least £62.5 million in guaranteed fees before they sanction a move for the 25-year-old. With of course with expected add-ons, but that's what they want. Ban United, that's according to Star Sport. Anyways, this is the latest transfer gossip and speculation making the rounds. Newcastle have made Italy international Giorgio Scalvin their top defensive transfer target, with the Magpies hoping they can sign the 21-year-old Atlanta centre-back for about £30 million. That's according to the Times. Arsenal boss Mikel Arteta has set a deadline of less than 2 weeks for the club to agree a deal for Sporting's Sweden striker Victor Gyökeres, 27 years of age, with RB Leipzig's 22-year-old Slovenian forward Benjamin Sesko, and Aston Villa and England's Oli Watkins alternative options. So that's according to the Mirror. I did tell you yesterday that it looks like, I do not know whether it's a game of chess or game of poker, but Arsenal look to increasingly pivoting towards Victor Gyökeres ahead of Benjamin Sesko, who we did report on earlier on this summer that he was a primary target for Arsenal. Then Barcelona will make a fresh approach for Liverpool's 28-year-old Colombian international, Luis Diaz. Remember, Barcelona have, like we've spoken, they've missed out on signing Nico Williams. They had an earlier attempt to sign Luis Diaz, but those attempts were turned down by Liverpool. Bayern Munich approached Liverpool for the same player, and they said no to Bayern Munich. We know Al Nassr want to target Luis Diaz. I do not know why bid has not, formally come in for him, but let's wait and see. Zero Requiem says, is here with a comment to say, Thomas Partey left Arsenal, immediately gets charged. Is that a clear indication Arsenal was protecting Partey while he was under contract? I want to answer that in two ways. One, I do not think that Arsenal were protecting him to the extent of influencing the law or the authorities in the work of their investigations. I do not think that was the case. I do think they were protecting his career by continuing to play him even amidst of the accusations, because, like I said, they were merely accusations and not charges. Because if there had been charges, then the case would have been different, because then he would have been formally charged. And then, according to the authorities and his lawyer, they know that he is been cooperating, but those investigations have gone on for the last 2 years, and even up to date, according to BBC Sport, the police are still open to receiving information in helping prosecute the case. If there's anybody with any information whatsoever, they are still calling on. That means the investigation itself is not fully concluded, but it has reached a stage where the authorities feel they have enough to go ahead and make a charge. Because if so, this is a clear indication there is some corruption involved between Arsenal and the government. So, I mean, that would be the assumption, but I'm not inclined to believe so, because in the past, we've had players brought accusations before them, and clubs condemned them or suspended them, and they ended up to be innocent. The most significant case for me was that of Benjamin Mendy. He had up to 6 women accusing him of rape, and sexual assault. After a long trial, he was proven innocent. And guess what? Nobody is going to repair his reputation. In any case, at the end of the day, he returned to Manchester City to try and sue them for £11 million worth of unpaid wages. That's for starters. 2, we had the case of Daphne Sigurdsson at Everton, charged of sexual assault on a minor. The authorities concluded that their investigations did not find enough evidence to go ahead and prosecute the case. So just imagine you condemning a player because there have been accusations leveled against him, and then at the end of the day, he's found innocent, And we know these things have happened in the past. They happened with Neymar. They've happened with Cristiano Ronaldo. Now, it's not to say that rape in itself is not a serious accusation. It is serious. You have a victim on the other side that is making the accusation. But we also have precedent that women have leveled these accusations against innocent people. So it's a bit difficult for you, Just imagine Neymar had been equally condemned. Just imagine Cristiano Ronaldo had been equally condemned, just because accusations were there. Now, of course, there's a slight difference in the work of Benjamin Mendy, like you put it, because at least for him, he had been formally charged, He had been formally charged. But, okay, Daphne Sigurdsson, 3 years of his career without play, just because, because he was arrested, then granted bail, and then the club chose to suspend him. So now, for me, the principle that I think we ought to stick on in this case is you're innocent until proven guilty. I think that's what the club, looked at it as well, to say, okay, the player is being accused of these things. He is cooperating with the authorities in as far as the investigations are concerned. And I'm sure the club ought to have known. And let's not forget, until yesterday, that was June the 30th, the club were willing to offer Thomas Partey a new contract to continue with him. That means, as far as they were aware, he wasn't charged. or no charges were preferred against him. So they had an innocent man to play with. So news about the charges, news about this charge until he left Arsenal. Yes. Now, of course, it feels coincidental that it's after he left Arsenal that the charges have suddenly been brought. That's what we feel. But like I said, we do not know when the investigations ended, And like I said, from what the police are saying, it doesn't look like the investigations have even ended. They've only reached a point where they feel they can make a case. So Partey refused to sign a contract, so Arsenal stopped protecting him because he's no longer a member of the club. So that's usually what happens. When you part ways with the company you're working with, then they have no reason to protect you because you're no longer their member. So you're on your own out there. Basically, that's what it is. Now, again, for people that have made the argument that maybe Arsenal should have condemned the player in the wake of the accusations, I just gave an example. Let's think of it this way. Your club wins a trophy, they go out an entire squad to celebrate, spend the entire night drinking, clubbing, and etc. And then the following day or a week later, you have all sorts of women bringing accusations of rape and sexual assault or molestation before them. Would you rather than your club suspends the entire squad just because there are accusations? Because the argument is easy for us to make in that direction when it's only one player, So it's a bit of a delicate balance, if I'm being honest. But also, you remember, let's stick to the principle of you're innocent until you're proven guilty. Because just because somebody accuses you of having done something doesn't mean that you're guilty. So we, the public, have been prone to condemning people or to passing judgment because in the eyes of the public, they speak with the sense as though that person is guilty, So until it is proven that you are guilty, you're innocent, Anybody can be falsely accused on any given day of doing what they've not done, whether it is theft, whether it is rape, whether it is assault, whether it is fraud, whatever the case may be. So if we do go ahead and condemn you until you're proven guilty, then how better are we as human beings? So basically, that's what is happening. So I've seen, racial slurs, of course, the timing of the charges does not help in Arsenal's defense of their own image. But if we are to objectively look at it, that is how I can simply put it. There were accusations. He was cooperating with the investigation. I know the club at one time, there's a time he was away from the club and not like going on holiday, but to aid in those very investigations. So imagine you have a player, let's say under contract, let's say suspend him for 3 years of his career without playing, and then eventually he's found innocent, that he actually didn't do anything. Then you've just ruined 3 years of his career, and then the people who are condemning you for having not suspended him won't come back to say you owe this player their entire career because you ruined it by suspending him just because of mere accusations. But when the verdict is that he's guilty, then the argument becomes easier for those people to sort of make, in that kind of sense. That's how I feel about it. You come back to say, but proof is there. That's exactly, now that's what you're saying, that proof is there, because the investigations I'm not privy to the file that contains all these sorts of evidence, but that's with the police, And if there was evidence which wasn't brought before the club to say this is what the case looks like, then the club had no grounds to act on. You remember the case of Mason Greenwood. Manchester United conducted their own internal investigations. They put a player on, on suspension, not to play, to train with the team, but eventually, February 2023, those charges were dropped because the key witness are pulled out of the case. And be that as of it may, if police had also found, evidence beyond just the key witnesses, they would have gone on to prosecute their case, even without those key witnesses. Of course, maybe it would have been a bit harder for them to prove without those witnesses, but at least that evidence would have helped to, get maybe a short-term sentence in the work of those attempted, rape cases for Mason Greenwood. So you come back to say, I'm not saying he is guilty. Arsenal helped him block the charges until he left the club. Again, I do not want to think of it that way. because I do not know it for a fact. But because you say it is easier to assume because of the timing of the charges that it does look that way. And I do not want to disagree with you on that. I do not disagree with you that and I said this yesterday, that what Arsenal will sort of struggle to defend is sort of maybe the timing of the charges. If the charges had come when he was still an Arsenal player, then we wouldn't be having that very discussion. If now that they have come after he has left the club, then we can easily make that argument. But like I said also, until yesterday, the club were still willing to offer him a contract, meaning to the best of their knowledge, he was innocent. Because had he been guilty, or had they received their own evidence to say the player is really, really guilty of this, then they wouldn't be offering him a new contract in the first place. So I'm sure I would want to believe if they have influence to that magnitude, as we would want to allege, if they have influence of that magnitude, as we would want to allege, that they capable of influence peddling, then why would they go ahead and try and offer the player a contract and knowing if that they are privy to certain investigations that do point to the player's guilt? Then, because let's assume the club's lawyers were in touch with police and keeping tabs of the investigation and were receiving information to that respect. Now remember, the club's lawyers are not Thomas Partey's lawyers. They are the club's lawyers. That's why Thomas Partey has his own personal lawyer. I think that lawyer is called Jenny. The lawyer is called Jenny something. Jenny what something. Yes, Jenny Wiltshire. That's Thomas Partey's lawyer. So, anyways, I can see Fatrus Ali is joining us. Hi, Fatrus Ali. Good to have you back. Always a pleasure to see you on the Football Tribe UG channel. You say, do you remember me? Most definitely, Fatrus Ali. What do you think of Diego Jota's accident? Maybe I'll give my submission in just a bit, if you can indulge me. Zero, you continue to say, Arsenal is willing to overlook what he has done as long as he signs the contract, and if he does, Arsenal will then continue to protect him. Again, that sort of argument is easy for us to make under the assumption that the club were protecting him even when they knew that he was maybe guilty. But remember, they were not trying to give him a 5-year contract, because if it was about protecting him really, they would have easily said, you're 32, we think you're capable of playing for us maybe for the next 3-4 years, maybe even 5 years. Let's give you a longer term contract and drag this thing on, But because, when charges are brought to you, brought before you, are from 10 years later, it's basically not the same as 3 years later. But again, that's for argument's sake. So they were only giving him a 1-year contract extension, for which they could not reach terms to. And if Partey knew that the club really were trying to protect him on all these charges, what makes you think that Partey wasn't even inclined to even sign much earlier? Because it would have been in his personal favor to even sign with the club, even if they had been offering lesser wages. But because the club were not willing to meet his personal terms, regardless of what was happening away from the club, regardless of what was happening in his personal life, he decided not to renew his contract. Because if our argument is that the club were trying to protect him, then he would have known as a player that, look here, the club is trying to protect me from this kind of thing, and maybe to evade the law in some form or shape. Then if I sign with the club, then they continue to protect me for the foreseeable future. And it keeps me in the clear as maybe I work out my defense, maybe I get away with it, Then it would have been easy for Thomas Partey to say, then I must sign. Even if they are giving me lesser pay, then I must sign with the club to stay under their protection, to stay under their protective umbrella. But at the end of the day, it was, two teams negotiating, and they did not reach an agreement and chose to they part ways. So if the club had that hanging over Thomas Partey's head, then it would have been sort of a negotiating chip that they get to play with him, a negotiating card to say, look here, if you do not sign, then we are going to cease protecting you, and these charges are going to catch up with you. And he would have quickly signed. At least I'm inclined to believe that if that were the case, then he would have quickly signed, So when you look at it that way, that the club was trying to protect him, even when they knew something bigger than the public was being led on to believe, then I would make that argument to say, look here, then it would have worked in Thomas Partey's favor to sign with the club, to continue with the club's protection. But because I'm not inclined to believe that was the case, that the club were intentionally protecting him, even though they believe he was guilty, then, that's not the debate we can have. Nonetheless, you must admit there is something shady going on with Arsenal. Again, I do not know if I'm speaking with bias here, but I certainly do not want to believe so. I take it in your own personal life, that you're working somewhere, and then maybe you're accused of a crime that you did not commit, or you did commit. Whether you committed it or not, that's for you as an individual at the back of your mind to know for certain, to know I did this or I did not do this. Now, just imagine the place where you work are quick to condemn you just because there is accusations against you, either terminate your contract or suspend you without pay or put you on suspended leave, just because there are accusations. And then maybe 2 years down the road or 10 years down the road, you're eventually acquitted. So your life is ruined, and yet you are innocent from the get-go, So you're innocent until proven guilty. That's the principle I don't want us to forget in this entire argument. Regardless of where you are, what you think might have happened between Thomas Partey and these three women that are involved in these charges, because it's 5 counts of rape and 1 count of sexual assault. Regardless of what you feel about that, let's not forget the principle. You're innocent until proven guilty. So, Azero, you come back to say, nonetheless, you must admit there's something shady going on at Arsenal. I do not want to believe so, because Arsenal gave him a cheap contract that is not different from blackmail. Now, it wasn't, from what I gather, it wasn't a cheap contract. What the clubs simply made the argument for was, they looked at his injury history. It was only last season that Thomas Partey played at least 35 Premier League games. The other season, he had played at least 30 or more games. That was the 2022-2023 campaign, where he made 33 Premier League appearances. Now, that's 2 out of 5 years at Arsenal. In the first 2 years, he missed at least 14 games in each of those first 2 seasons due to injuries. When it comes to the 2023-2024 season, he missed as many as 24 Premier League games. That was in the Premier League alone. So, meaning the club knew his injury record, and they were telling him, look here, because even as a player and his camp, that's his agency, they were telling the club, look here, we're talking about a player who has arguably had his best season here. He's played more than 50 games in this calendar season, because he played at least 12 games in the UEFA Champions League, plus 35 games in the Premier League and all the other competitions. So his availability last season was the best it has ever been. So his agents were trying to leverage that on the club to say the player needs even a pay rise, which the club did not agree to. Apparently, and this is what is being reported, is that he wanted a 2-year contract. Now, the club were only willing to give a 1-year contract extension, maybe with a possibility to extend for a further year, and they did not want to increase his wages because of that injury history. 2, as earlier on had been reported, the initial case was that he would take a reduced, pay to stay at the club. We've seen clubs do this every time and again with senior players that they want to retain, but are not willing to keep them on the wages they've been on. That has happened before. You remember what happened with Kepa Arrizabalaga with Chelsea before he signed a new contract, before he went out on loan to FC Bournemouth. He took a pay cut and agreed to a £5 million release clause in his contract before he went away to Bournemouth. So it's a negotiating table. You bring your cards, I bring my cards, and we reach an agreement. If we do not reach an agreement, we part ways. So that's how the club, argued their case. Now, in argument of their case, they could not reach a verdict, and they chose to part ways at that point. Now, if it's 5 days later or 4 days later that then this charge is about Thomas Partey, of course we are inclined to think that is it just coincidence, but again the club protected itself. They were negotiating with the player because as far as they knew it was merely accused and not charged. So then you say nonetheless you must you say because Arsenal gave him a cheap, I do not, like I said, I do not think it's a cheap contract. Would not be surprised if there are some charges are coming to Miyasu's way. Now, I suddenly do now exactly. If we want us to use the example of Takehiro Tomiyasu. Now, Takehiro Tomiyasu, during the 2023, during the 2023-2024 Premier League season, he made only 17 appearances, 10 starts and 7 as a substitute, because he was, injured. Across all competitions, including the UEFA Champions League, he made only 22 appearances for the club. He was injured. And then came this season, which the recently concluded season, he made only one appearance for the team, and he got injured, unfortunately. That was during the first international break of the season, while away on international duty with Japan. Now, the club stood with him. Of course, he went into treatment. At some point, they thought he had recovered, and during training, he suffered an injury setback. The injury necessitated surgery, and the club weighed their options. Remember, I think it was prior to the start of last season that he got a new contract. It was a 2-year contract with an option to extend it for a further year. So going into next season, it was only left with 1 year left to it, which is 12 months. So the club assessed, and with his current injury, which he was expected to return from in about 4 to 5 months' time, which essentially, when you look at it, you will be halfway into the season, and then you will have only 6 months left to his contract. Although you had an option to extend for a further year, you're looking at this track record. And then also, maybe the club doctors assessed the injury and told the club, look, this injury is too bad. It is bound to be a recurring injury for some time. So you retaining the player on the wage bill, on the wage books of the club is not going to be sustainable, or is not going to be good business for you. Maybe the club doctors advised the club in that direction, which culminated into a mutual termination of his contract for the player to part ways with the club. And as soon as he part ways with the club, which was announced yesterday, there's interest for him from the Saudi Pro League club. So I do not want to assume that just because the club terminated his contract and they part ways with him, then charges are going to come before him. Let's not forget, Arsenal have done this before. Sid Kolasinac, they agreed to terminate his contract. Mesut Ozil was the other. Socrates Pastatopoulos. I mean, no charges were brought before those people. Again, these were entirely business decisions. So maybe also Andrea Bata, sporting director, has assessed the squad and told the club, look here, you have this player, all these kinds of wages, and yet he's injured, and the expectation is that he's going to stay injured until halfway into the next season, which we believe is going to be a very crucial season. Why don't we cut our losses with Takehiro Tomiyasu and let the player go and find a replacement in the squad? So that is also another school of argument that we can level in this particular case. So I'm not inclined to believe, and then also still using the Takehiro Tomiyasu example that you're trying to bring. Now, if the club, let's say, knew that maybe Thomas Partey was guilty in some form or shape, assuming that they had been privy to the details of the investigation and what direction it was heading, why, before they could have chosen to sell him last summer, there was a bit of interest for the Ghanaian international, but it did not come to the valuation of their preference to let him go. They could have chosen to do that. Why did they not sit with him after the 2023-2024 season and say, look here, given your injury track record, you've only made 14 appearances this season. We do not think we can continue with you. Let's reach an agreement. We terminate your contract and pay you out, but yet the sole reason is based entirely on what the club is privy to in regards to the ongoing investigations against the player in Thomas Partey. So if you want to make that school of argument, or that kind of argument, that the club knew some information, then they could have chosen to terminate his contract at a certain point, which they did not do. And they carried on with him and were willing to give him a new contract. So that's how I look at things. That's how I look at it. Let's agree or disagree, but at least that's how I'm looking at it. Yet they can agree a mutual termination fee in the tens of millions. Yes, like I said, if the club were privy to any form of information whatsoever in regards to the information, to the investigation regarding Thomas Partey, and perhaps got word, let's say, from the authorities that look here, we think you have a guilty player in here based on what our investigations are revealing. If because we started off with you making the argument that maybe the club had some form of influence peddling in this particular case. So let's assume, for argument's sake, that that was true. Then what you're saying is that then the club would have simply sat down with the player and said, "Look here, we want to terminate your contract. What is it going to take?" And then the player sits down, they look at the terms of the contract. Of course, there is always an exit clause when it comes to contract termination. What either party has to meet, either financially or otherwise, when it comes to who is instigating the termination in the first place. Those clauses are in those contracts. So if Arsenal knew that information, then they would have terminated his contract. But it did not happen that way. So I'm not inclined to believe that the club knew that the information that the public is assuming that they had in the work of these investigations or accusations, because they can't. If Arsenal sell Partey, he will get charged. If he stays, Arsenal can still collude with government to stop the charges. Now, let's not forget, if that's going to be your argument, one, if the club wanted to get rid of him because of charges, they would have gotten rid of him. That's at least that we can agree on. Two, if the idea was to continue protecting him in the work of these charges, for how long was he going to play for Arsenal? Was he going to play for Arsenal for forever? Definitely not. That means that, again, at some point, he would have, had his career end at Arsenal, and those charges would have been brought before him. At least that is what I want to assume. But because I'm not inclined to assume that the club were, influence peddling in this particular case, then, I'm inclined to argue otherwise, based on that argument, that you cannot protect him forever because he's not a lifetime member of Arsenal. He's not going to be under contract his entire life at Arsenal. So eventually, his contract or his relationship with the club was bound to end at some point. And at whatever that point would have been, then maybe if your argument stands that the club was influence peddling, then those charges would still have brought against him. They would have still caught up with him. But then again, it takes us back to the other argument. If the player knew that the club was trying to protect him on these charges or on these accusations, then it would have been in his best interest to sign the new contract and stay at the club and say, "Look, I'm under this protection." It would have been an easy argument to make before his agents and look to say, because I'm sure even his agents is aware of these things, to say, "Look here, we are in this bit of a situation which is not ideal for all of us. Now, the best way is for us to stay with Arsenal, and we continue getting their protection as this big brand." But because I'm not inclined to believe that's the case, then I am not swayed by your argument to say that he was under the club's protection, and that's why these charges were not brought, or that's why he wasn't being prosecuted. So are you trying to say that Manchester United do not have the influence to, let's say, to protect Mason Greenwood the way it was, but they chose to let matters go on to be investigated, and eventually the player was killed? The reason as to why Manchester United did continue with Mason Greenwood was because of the fans and their the strikings that they were doing outside the stadium, women stay away from Manchester United and things of that nature, really. So if you and I are being objective enough, then we can look at these arguments for both sides and say the club. For me, particularly in this particular case, I'm not condemning the club because, like I'm assuming I'm taking the side of presumed innocent until proven guilty, then I'm with the club. Then two, if the argument is that the player knew he is under the club's protection, then it would be in his best interest, even if they would have said, "Look, we are giving you a 50% cut on your wages because we are trying to protect you," then he would have agreed to it because he would have known it would be in his best interest. But because that's not the case, at least I'm not inclined to believe so, then the things went in the direction in which they went. And then you said because he is innocent and Arsenal gave him a cheaper contract. No, they did not give him a cheaper contract. I've given you his injury history at the club. You know, the only season he has been almost fit throughout the entire campaign was last season. That's the only season, because even in the 2022 season, when he made at least 33 Premier League appearances, even at the tail end of it, he still got injured and he was unavailable to help the team. You know, so okay, let's not look at, you know, the pieces in isolation, because if we look at them in isolation, then it will be easy for us to conclude one way or the other. But it's a combination of factors that the club are looking at here in this case, in terms of awarding him a contract, you know. So then you say by offering him a 50k it was never a 50k contract. It was never a 50k contract. Now, you cannot have contract talks where one is asking for pay rise and then you're taking literally a 75% cut. Or it wasn't, not one bit. Now, here's the other thing. According to the information we are getting, one, because apparently, and I do not know this to be a fact cast in stone, apparently he was on 200 grand a week, you know, on 200 grand a week. Was the club willing to, in their offering, they thought they had wanted to give him lesser wages for him to stay at the club. The player was demanding for higher wages. Again, if it was to act in his personal interest, if he knew it was in his personal interest to stay at the club for his protection, then even if it was going to be 50,000 contract, then he would have said yes to it. But we are talking about a player who was asking for an increase in his wages. You know, two. Now, because they knew he was going to be a squad player, the way Jorginho had been in his years at Arsenal, that's why they were saying, look, we want you to take a pay cut. It wasn't as significant as you're trying to report it to be. So, and if in the future it does come out to be exactly that, then I'll come back here and I apologize to you. You know, but let's go with the assumption with your information that it was 50k a week. You know, that from 200,000 pounds to 50k a week. Let's assume it was that was a contract offer that was being put at his table. Then again, it would have been in Partey's interest to say, okay, I'm taking a significant pay cut here, but it is to protect me at the end of the day because of this situation I'm involved in outside the confines of the club. So I would still sign, but he did not sign. You know, so it boiled down to that. So let's not use the money factor as what was the determinant for the charges. I'm not inclined to believe so in that argument. You say it was. I believe it wasn't. So on that one, let's just agree to disagree. Yes, on that one, when it comes to because in the end, towards the tail end of what we are getting, the impression we are getting was the club were willing, because he was demanding for an increase on wages, the club were willing to keep him on his exact wages and retain him for 1 year. And that's why the contract was bound to be shorter. You know, that was also the other argument from the club. Either way, Partey should have taken the offer or this would have not happened. Now, again, we can only assume that it wouldn't have happened if he had signed a new contract. So we will never know that if he had signed a contract, that then the charges wouldn't have been brought against him. Maybe even the club were saying, we're also trying to deleverage themselves to say, look here, you have this thing. If these charges do come, we do not want it hitting us in this kind of manner in part of those negotiations. But again, I'm not inclined to believe so. Let's go back to Fatrus Ali, who asked me about the unfortunate accident of Diego Jota. Fatrus Ali, what I mean, I really have no opinion on that, really. Only to say that it is a sad moment, really. It's one incident that we did speak about at great length. It's really, really sad for Diego Jota and his family, his wife and his children, his wife Rute Jota, and and his kids. It's a sad moment for Liverpool. It's a sad moment for the football fraternity because we've lost, one too many players in these kinds of things. We did lose Jose Antonio Reyes in a car accident. He was 35 years of age at the time. That also happened in Spain. I think that was around 2019 when Robert Pires, Jose Antonio Reyes was equally involved in that car crash. Yes, it was on June the 1st, 2019. We also lost him. Then you remember the incident of Ismail Chakiote at Beijing Enterprise during training. He collapsed in training and passed on at the age of 30. You remember the incident with Christian Atsu, the Ghanaian international who died, in the tragic earthquakes in Turkey. You remember the plane crash of Emiliano Sala in 2019. That was in January as he tried to complete his move from FC Nantes to Cardiff City. You remember the clubs going over a dispute in regards to that transfer fee, whether it was payable after the player had, died, and things of that nature, really. So to speak about the incident of Diego Jota, it's really, really unfortunate. It's a sad one to sort of live with. When you go away from the football fraternity, you remember on November 30th, 2013, at the age of 40, the film star Paul Walker died in a car crash. So I was watching Jose Mourinho in an interview with Sky Sport, and he spoke about one of his Porto players during his time in FC Porto, who had equally passed away in a car crash. So it is quite very, very unfortunate that these things do happen. Unfortunately, it is the nature of life. It is a great loss. He is a great loss as a human being to the football fraternity, but at the world at large. Again, if you did watch the quarterfinals between between Fluminense and Al Hilal, you must have watched those images of an emotional Ruben Neves because he was best friends with Diego Jota. You must have watched those emotional scenes for Joao Cancelo. So that's the situation really. And for the parents of Diego Jota, they lost two sons. There's no way to explain it. There's no way to justify it. You can never know why these things happen. But unfortunately, it is the nature of life really. So it is what it is. May his soul rest in peace. We do commiserate with the entire football fraternity for the loss of Diego Jota. Anyways, guys, back to the transfer gossip and speculation. Sorry, we had to revisit the situation of Thomas Partey because Zero brought submissions or at least his views on the matter and the way he looks at it, and he's not alone. There's a good number of people out there that share similar views or similar sentiments regarding the Thomas Partey situation. But like I've explained it, at least to give you my honest, objective opinion, that's I also look the way I also look at it. Maybe we can conclusively not reach on an individual agreement on these arguments because every side has their arguments. But now that the charges are before the authorities, because he's expected to be in court on the 5th of August before the Westminster Magistrates Court, let's wait for him to prove his case. To prove his innocence on that side, because if let's say he turns out to be innocent, then clearly we will be back to revisit some of these arguments. If he turns out to be guilty, again, we'll be back to revisit some of these arguments. But let's not forget one principle that governs law, or in any country you may land in, at least, I'm not saying in all of them, but at least in many countries that believe in, the law, they will tell you you're innocent until you're proven guilty. So let's not forget that principle of law and keep that in mind as we make our own arguments in regards to this whole situation. Because I would want to believe at least that was the premise upon which the club also hinged themselves to stay with Thomas Partey for the whole of that length, and also their willingness to extend his contract at the time. So let's not put that out of our minds. Okay, quickly. Okay, Manchester United and England forward Marcus Rashford is a backup option for Barcelona if they fail to sign Luis Diaz. I will discuss that. Then Poland goalkeeper Wojciech Szczesny, 35, came out of retirement to join Barcelona last season and is set to sign a 2-year contract with the Spanish champions. That's according to ESPN, but it's also a report that we discussed previously. And I continue to wonder what that means for Andre Mark-ter-Stegen, who is of interest to Galatasaray, because they also signed the goalkeeper Johan Garcia on a 5-year contract from Espanyol. So let's wait and see what that means. Then Everton's 35-year-old Senegalese midfielder Idriss Gana Gueye, whose contract expired on Monday, has signed a new 1-year contract, a new 1-year deal with the option for another year. That's according to Foot Mercato in French. Then Tottenham are among clubs showing interest in Genoa centre-back Conny de Winter, 23 years, with the Belgian international, valued at about 21.5 million pounds by his Italian club. That's Genoa. Then Napoli are considering a rivaling Manchester United and Saudi Pro League side Al Qadash for signing Fiorentina's 25-year-old Italy striker Moises Kean, whose release clause stands at 52 million euros, which expires on July 15th. That's according to Mercato in Italy. Now, Napoli's primary target is Darwin Núñez in this transfer window for a striker. They had held conversations with Jonathan David, but I think they did not reach an agreement, and Jonathan David has since joined Juventus on a 5-year contract. That move was sealed yesterday. Then Burnley and Crystal Palace are among the Premier League clubs interested in 25-year-old Napoli and Sweden midfielder Jens Jachest, who spent last season on loan at Ipswich Town. Then Crystal Palace have also made an offer to sign Ajax left back Bona Sosa, with the 27-year-old Croatian international among several options. Oliver Glasner's side are considering to add depth to the squad. That's according to Athletic. While Inter Miami remain in talks with Lionel Messi over him extending his contract beyond 2025. So there you have it, guys. It's been a pleasure doing this. It's been almost 1 hour. Sorry, this dragged on a bit longer than I had anticipated, but it's always entertaining to have your arguments, your debate, and the conversation regarding football with you. But have yourselves a wonderful weekend, and let's not forget the R2 fixtures coming up in the FIFA Club World Cup at the quarterfinals. That's between PSG and Bayern Munich at 7 p.m. East African time, and then later at 11 p.m. with Real Madrid take on Borussia Dortmund in the same competition. Anyways, for those of you interested in learning some digital skills or soft skills like cybersecurity, coding, and web design, do not forget to check out our friends at Ebo State, based in Kansanga, Kampala. They do offer online training sessions as well as in-person training sessions, and help their trainees find jobs in the dynamic digital world. So we'll leave their link down in the description so that you can check out their website. You do qualify for a 5% discount if you do take them up on that offer. Otherwise, it's been a pleasure doing this with you today. Let's catch up later tonight and discuss more sport and also the FIFA Club World Cup and more news that will have come our way. Otherwise, stay blessed, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.